work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Very good evening. It's 8 p.m. on Brazier tonight. Le countdown in less than 3 hours. The deadline set by France for Britain to give in on fishing licences expires. What happens then? Also, Biden falls asleep, Greta uses the F-bomb, and the Archbishop of Canterbury apologises for comparing climate change to Nazism. I'll take you through the bits of day one of COP26 you won't see on other news channels. And tonight's Brazier angle, as an exhibition featuring suicide vests is dismantled, how brave really were the artists behind it? All that coming up. But first, a news update with Polly.
Good evening. Your news at 8 o'clock. Boris Johnson has been urging the world's leaders to take action on climate change, telling them it's 1 minute to midnight. The Prime Minister was speaking on the opening day of the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow. Around 120 heads of state and government saw the speech, including the US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Prince Charles likened the climate challenge that leaders face to preparing for war.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us just how devastating a global cross-border threat can be. Climate change and biodiversity loss are no different. In fact, they pose an even greater existential threat, to the extent that we have to put ourselves on what might be called a warlike footing.
Meanwhile, speaking at a rally near the summit, Greta Thunberg told climate activists that politicians are pretending to take people's futures seriously and that COP26 would not create change.
Change is not going to come from inside there. That is not leadership. This is leadership. Yeah! This is what leadership looks like. We say no more blah, blah, blah. No more exploitation of people and nature and the planet. We're sick and tired of it, and we're going to make the change, whether they like it or not.
Elsewhere, President Macron is warning France could introduce more stringent port and border checks from tomorrow unless Britain eases its stance on the post-Brexit fishing row. The dispute comes after UK and Jersey authorities denied licences to French boats, arguing permission can only be given to those with a history of fishing on British waters. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the UK could take legal action if the French don't back down. Downing Street says it has a robust contingency plan in place if France disrupts trade from midnight tonight. Now, a train driver involved in the Salisbury crash on Sunday is suffering from life-changing injuries. British Transport Police have said there's no evidence the train struck an object just before the crash. They confirmed there were no fatalities, but 13 people were taken to hospital for their injuries. National Rail inquiries say disruption following the crash will continue for the next few days. The Oxford English Dictionary creators have declared the word vax their word of the year for 2021. The organisation says that by September this year it was used 72% more frequently than last year. That comes after last year's report was expanded to reflect the unprecedented nature of 2020, with new words like furlough, COVID-19 and phrases like Black Lives Matter among some of the most popular terms newly inserted into the list. You're bang up to date. Now back to Brazier.
Well, it started, COP26, and in coming days it would probably be easier to extract a blast of warmth from a heat pump as it will be to avoid the hot air from Glasgow. So tonight, as the biggest international gathering held on British soil for years concludes its inaugural day, we thought it worth holding up a mirror to catch the breath of the vanities of some of those involved. The veteran Channel 4 presenter Jon Snow kicked things off, complaining in a tweet that his pilgrimage north by train had been impeded. Trees and branches affected by climate change have slowed our rail journey, said Snow. Well, lots of folk were quick to point out that strong winds in autumn often brought down trees, and it may not necessarily or definitively be the fault of global warming. Not to be outdone, another journalistic panjandrum, CNN's Wolf Blitzer trumpeted his network's coverage of COP with a picture of him sitting ready to broadcast, not from Glasgow, where everyone else was, but 50 miles away in Edinburgh. Lovely backdrop, though, Wolf. Plenty of stick to for jet-setting billionaires who feel that not all carbon footprints are equal. A little light mockery too for the leader of the free world who arrived somewhere within this never-ending cavalcade. As you count the vehicles, I've probably got time to mention that the air miles of those attending have come under the microscope. It was noted, for instance, that the chief executive of Sky, one of the main sponsors of COP, has been regularly commuting by private jet to the UK from her home 3,500 miles away in the US. Do believe in better, won't you? Well, outside the main venue, Greta Thunberg addressed protesters. She was mobbed, fittingly enough for an 18-year-old who inspires a degree of devotion once reserved for spiritual leaders. She arrived at All Saints' Day. But her halo slipped a little as she slipped into bad language. Greta used the F word to describe the efforts of world leaders. Naughty doom goblin, as one regular contributor here persists in calling her. I never would. Well, not that the man who runs the Church of England got his words exactly right either. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, apologised for likening the threat posed by climate change to the Nazis, while saying the current generation of politicians will be, quote, cursed if they fail to secure a deal at COP. Here he is talking to the BBC.
We'll speak of them in far stronger terms than we speak today of the politicians of the 30s, of the politicians who ignored what was happening in Nazi Germany, because this will kill people all around the world for generations. It will allow a genocide on an infinitely greater scale.
And he later apologised. There's a fortnight of this to come and 25,000 delegates on hand to ensure we talk about little else. And we will tackle some of the serious questions raised in coming days. We've got plenty of time. But amid all the bombast of day one, it felt right to offer a reminder, exemplified perhaps by the closing eyes of sleepy Joe Biden, that not everyone will be watching what happens in Glasgow as attentively as they are told to. Joining me then, the political commentator Richard Taylor, to reflect on day one of COP. Richard, thanks for joining us. Do appreciate your time. If you were one of the people who've spent, goodness knows, years putting this thing together, 25,000 delegates, all the man and woman hours that have gone into this, and probably the last image you wanted to see on day one was the leader of the free world nodding off during the opening speeches.
Well, he is known, Colin, as Sleepy Joe Biden, so it's very fitting for him to be falling asleep. But I have to be quite honest with you. I watched some of the comments myself, and to be quite frank, it's very uninspiring, not very charismatic. And of course, as you've already pointed out in your opening remarks, the hypocrisy that we've seen from these political leaders being jetted in on private jets with, a load of cars with Biden. There's 85 cars, with gas guzzlers and all that kind of stuff. And it really smacks in the face, really, of a lot of normal people like myself who consider this to be hypocrisy, because not only that, what is the cost of this conference? Several £100 million has been suggested. In fact, under a freedom of information request by the Glasgow to the Glasgow Security Services, when it was put out, they refused to give an answer. They said it's the UK government's responsibility. So we don't even know the cost of this yet. And yet here we have politicians demanding that people like us, little people like us, we cut our carbon emissions, and yet they themselves are admitting it more than we are. It's absolute hypocrisy. And I think the people out there, the public and your viewers and watchers of GB News tonight, will realise that and think, this is just hypocrisy. And don't forget, they're going to be treated. There's a reception tonight. I know there'll be champagne, caviar. Of course, there won't be any tax on it. They'll be lavish with loads of wonderful food and drink, all at the taxpayer's expense, may I say. And that, to me, is absolute hypocrisy. And that's what we're seeing right now. And let's be quite frank, it's the 26th COP they've had. It doesn't make a difference because the main players are not in the room. China, America there, we know, but Japan, India, we've heard from the India Prime Minister what they've already said. They're not in the room. So how is this going to have an impact going forward in bringing down the CO2 emissions that we're producing here in the UK? And certainly in the UK, we're one of the lowest. So the real issue is not us, really. It's these other big countries that are pushing out more than we are.
Richard, just in terms of the money that's spent, I mean, you're familiar with the argument. I'll rehearse it for our viewers, and that is that, yes, we could have done this by Zoom, but summitry doesn't always work that way. It works best, so the argument runs. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with this, but the argument runs, it works best if you get these individuals with all this power together physically face-to-face. The chemistry makes things work in a way that can't happen on the end of a Zoom call.
Well, I kind of see that argument. I understand it. But look, we've been, for the last 18 months to 2 years, Colin, we've been under this pandemic where major interactions between political, leaders and we've dealt with things through Zoom. Surely that could have been the case this time around. I mean, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm going to. Greta Thunberg, for example, she's saying that, all these politicians, it's just words. I'm actually agreeing with her. I cannot believe I'm agreeing because she should be in school. It's half term now anyway, so she's okay. But nevertheless, I think to myself, she's actually right, because you've got these politicians demanding that we cut emissions ourselves. And yes, they've talked about this green agenda. Now that goes from electric cars to boilers to taxing our meat. I mean, where's this going to? This green tax that the government is seeking to impose. This is a big government, and it's an overreach into our lives that we're seeing that I've never seen before. It's a Conservative government that claim to be a low tax government, but they're not. In effect, what this will do, it'll be a huge burden for the lowest paid and those who work the hardest in society. Those are the ones that will be affected the most. When you consider changing your heating system, your boiler, going to electric cars and all, people can't afford that. Most people are worrying about how they're going to pay their gas bill, their electric bill this year because of the increase in energy prices. That's what people are concerned about. And most people, Colin, let me be quite honest with you, most people are not watching COP26. They couldn't give a monkey's about what's happening in Glasgow. That is the reality.
Yeah. But as you said, Richard, they will care about having to install a new heat pump or buy a new car, that sort of thing. And I suppose the test is that if they really don't like it, in a couple of years hence, there'll be a general election. And if they are so annoyed about what this government signed up to at COP26, they'll get a chance to vote them out. That's the way it works. That's the way it works for all the democracies present at COP26 over the next fortnight. If they sign their nations up, their people up, to a set of ambitious targets that cost the earth for their people back home to implement, then they'll be on the hook, because that's how democracies work. If we don't like it, we really don't like it, then we get the chance to vote out this government in a year or two. That's the way it works.
Yeah, I think Boris has had this Damascus Road experience to the green agenda. I mean, maybe it's his father's influence, we really don't know, but it seems as if he's kind of hell-bent on this whole green agenda, and I don't think it's going to help him in the next general election. I don't believe that there's enough voters out there that would be sympathetic towards his cause. Yes, there's a lot of younger people, and it's almost popular now. It's kind of like the in thing for young people to be into this green agenda, the Greta Thunberg kind of cult, if you like. That I understand that, but I don't think this is going to work in Boris's favour. I think it's working against him. I think this government is not what certainly a lot of people I've heard across social media have said. This isn't the Conservative government that I voted for.
Richard, it's really good to talk to you. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure. But thanks for your time this evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Colin.
Now, I'll just actually, before we move on to the next story, we took a poll 53 minutes ago. Question: does it matter if an elderly American president is filmed falling asleep at COP26? There it is. 5,500 of you already voted. You've got 37 minutes left to join that conversation, such as it is. A fifth of you take the view it doesn't matter. The lion's share certainly feel it does. We'll be discussing that as an additional and final question with our next guest, because the clocks went back at the weekend, you know that, but it's hard to remember quite so many of them ticking this menacingly all at once at COP26, just talking about it there in Glasgow. Boris Johnson says we are metaphorically a minute from midnight. Prince Charles went further. He says time has literally run out. But we're not about to find out just yet whether the planet faces a final countdown. We are, however, likely to learn soon what Paris is planning to do to our fishermen. Last night, President Emmanuel Macron gave Britain 24 hours to grant more licences to French boats to fish in UK waters or face retaliation, the likes of which we're not entirely sure about yet. That deadline, it expires in less than 3 hours at 11 p.m. UK time. So what should Boris Johnson do? Is there anything he can say that will make Macron meet him halfway? After all, Britain has agreed fishing permits for 98% of boats that applied for them. And if an international court were to adjudicate, it's hard to imagine it wouldn't find in Britain's favour. But will Macron even let the judges get a look in? He faces an election next year and doesn't seem to be in a mood to compromise. Well, later this hour, I'll be speaking to our home editor, Mark White, for his best guess as to where this game of Anglo-French chicken takes us. But before that, it's worth pointing out that we've been here before. Margaret Thatcher faced many run-ins with her French counterpart, Francois Mitterrand. How did she make sure British interests won out at the end of the day? Let's turn to Niall Gardner, who worked for Lady Thatcher and is now director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom in Washington, D.C. I'm delighted to say he's not there, he's here. Niall, thanks for coming and do appreciate it.
It's great to be here, Colin, thank you.
Should we just start actually with where I started my introduction with that poll of our viewers, 5,500 people, who I asked whether it mattered that on day one of COP26 the American president was pictured falling asleep. I mean, optically it's not a great look, but he's getting on a bit, probably a bit of jet lag. We shouldn't be too censorious, or should we?
Well, I think it does matter, and it has to be said, Colin, that actually that pose by Biden falling asleep is actually a standard pose for Joe Biden. He often falls asleep, yes. So he's a president who is certainly known as Sleepy Joe. He has a very sleepy demeanour, and although he could be partly forgiven for falling asleep at COP26, considering how boring the speeches are. So, you know, at the end of the day, he is the leader of the free world. He's supposed to be leading. You know, Joe Biden has well earned the reputation of being Sleepy Joe, because a lot of the time he is half asleep. And that's a dangerous thing, actually, when you're the leader of the free world. So perhaps not quite the best look for the US president.
When you were in harness with Lady Thatcher, there was somebody who had boundless energy, so it seemed. Handbagging European leaders to get her way, so ran the caricature. Her dealings with Francois Mitterrand, I mentioned this in the context of what we're seeing between Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron. What characterised them? There was a flirtatiousness to it. Who tended to win?
Well, I think overwhelmingly Margaret Thatcher won and prevailed over Francois Mitterrand, who was in office for most of the time that Margaret Thatcher was in office.
And a socialist.
And yes, he was a socialist. In fact, there were huge disagreements between Thatcher and Mitterrand. But Mitterrand also had a sort of sneaking admiration, actually, for Margaret Thatcher. And he admired her as a very strong leader. And at the end of the day, actually, she prevailed in the vast majority of the arguments between the UK and France. If you look at the tremendous victory gained by Margaret Thatcher over the EU rebate, also the pressure she applied against France over the selling of Exocet missiles to Argentina during the Falklands War. Another example of where she really applied tremendous pressure. And it was her view, of course, that you could never really trust the French. I mean, the French will knife you in the back and in the front. And so she certainly viewed the French as a significant adversary at times, and that's how we must approach the French at times as well when they're difficult.
I mean, there will be people screaming at the telly saying, "Oh, such national stereotypes," and they refer to us as perfidious Albion, and that reputation must be fairly well deserved over the centuries as well. They are our closest neighbours. There are so many things we do well together. I just wondered, just going back to how it worked with Lady Thatcher tactically. I suppose it's always helpful if you are playing chicken with somebody that they know that you really are prepared to go to the very wire.
Yes.
On a point of principle. And it helps if you're seen as a politician, a conviction politician of principle.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Mitterrand understood that and actually respected it. So he was not faced with some sort of weak-kneed leader in Downing Street, unlike, say, David Cameron, for example. This was Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher would not yield any ground to the French. And the French knew that. And so they knew they were dealing with a conviction politician who believed in everything that she was saying and was going to back up her words with clear actions. And that's what Margaret Thatcher was all about. I have to say, I think that Margaret Thatcher would have had a very dismissive view of Emmanuel Macron. I think Macron doesn't have any of the gravitas of a Francois Mitterrand.
But that's a generational thing a little bit. I mean, Francois Mitterrand fought for the for the French resistance against the Wehrmacht. I mean, it's a different generation.
Yes, certainly is. But I do think that with Emmanuel Macron, he's a very petty politician. He complains all the time. He behaves like a sort of spoilt brat at times. And it's a very immature foreign policy. And Margaret Thatcher would have certainly viewed Macron as not her equal, I would say. And I have to say that Macron's behaviour over the fishing issue is the behaviour of a tin pot dictator, and not the behaviour of a French president. This is not the way a French president should be acting towards a close partner and ally in many respects, actually. And so disgraceful behaviour from the French, pathetic. And I think that it's unbecoming the office of the French president.
I don't know whether to be amused or offended by this stuff that he does, as well as silly sort of psychological games, turning his back on the host of a summit. I mean, it's all of a piece to one degree. But in terms of the substantive question of what happens next, when two nations really fall out, at the extreme end, they actually it comes to blows. Heaven forfend, it's not going to come to that. But on a technical dispute, and this is kind of a technical dispute, it is the remedy is normally in law in the international courts. And surely that's where the remedy is for this.
Well, I think that's certainly the approach the British government is taking. They are threatening further action as well, naturally, against the French, because the French are behaving in an unreasonable fashion. But I think that we also have to be prepared to defend, our fishing vessels against any kind of aggression from the French. The French are behaving in an appalling manner. Basically, Macron is driven by a hatred of Brexit, a hatred of the democratic will of the British people. The British people voted to leave the European Union. He does not accept that.
We saw this extraordinary letter, didn't we, from his Prime Minister, Ursula von der Leyen?
Yes, he's behaving in an extremely petty, vindictive fashion. He needs to accept the reality. The British people have voted to leave the European Union. They have thrown off the shackles of the EU. They've thrown off the shackles of the French as well, frankly, as well. Macron's in no position whatsoever to be lecturing the British people about their own democratic decisions here.
Well, we'll find out now in just a little under 3 hours what the French position is. And it's not just about fishing. I mean, there's a possibility they may redact, as the word they're using, some of the energy that goes from the French mainland across to the Channel Islands. So we'll watch that with interest. Niall, thanks so much for coming in.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much, Colin.
Well, let's turn for some closing thoughts to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's at the conference in Glasgow to wrap up the day's events for us there. Darren, we've taken a fairly sideways look at events at COP26, and there'll be some people, I dare say, who say, look, don't ridicule this. It's an important challenge being faced up to by grown-up politicians. What did you make of it all?
Yeah, really interesting listening to your discussions there, Colin. Actually, when you're here on the grounds and you look at what's happening, it is fair to say that leaders here are not actually negotiating when it comes to climate targets. Could it have all been done via Zoom? Almost certainly. Do they all need to be here? Probably not. But what is all this about? It's about sending signals, isn't it? It's about making those speeches. It's about trying to get global attention and sending those messages out. But this idea that somehow these leaders are knocking their heads together around a table and actually negotiating, well, that simply isn't going to happen. There will be an element of that in the coming days when they leave, the leaders and the delegates take over and they try and work on things. I think overall what I take away from day one is that, yes, there is an awful lot of gloominess about all of this. Some might even say kind of pretty scary words and terms about the last minute to midnight, the last chance saloon, as Prince Charles has said. And in the end, Colin, again, is that true? We will see moments like this in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, where similar language may well be used. And also when it comes to the deal itself, it's actually not a new deal they're trying to get here. It's actually trying to hold up or keep together the Paris Accord that was signed up to back in 2015, which tried to cap global temperatures at 1.5 degrees. That is almost certainly not going to happen. It would involve such drastic action. And when you listen to Prime Minister Modi of India today, who's saying that he's not going to commit to carbon neutrality by 2070, that target seems a long way off. That's actually 20 years beyond what the UN would like to see. So what is a deal here in Glasgow? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure even the Prime Minister knows what it is. But those negotiations will actually begin with the delegates when the leaders leave. Though it must be said, the star of the show today, and we heard from a whole range of people, from Greta Thunberg to Prince Charles to David Attenborough to world leaders, was actually the Queen, who tonight addressed conference dressed in green, saying and arguing that politics and government is often about today, but statesmanship is about what leaders decide to do for tomorrow. A not subtle message, I think, from Her Majesty saying that leaders need to stop talking and start acting.
God save the Queen, but can she save COP? That's quite a question. Darren, thanks very much. After the break, the Brazier angle and a controversial exhibition on suicide vests finally closes.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GBNews.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GBNews.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Yesterday marked the end of an exhibition in Bournemouth that was designed to shock. It was the work of Jake and Dinus Chapman, who make a living by producing art that people find revolting, and at that they are highly proficient. Their latest effort showcased a collection of stylised suicide vests, actually bronze, but ones painted black and swathed in wires and fake explosives, quite convincing. Last week, a Tory MP took the bait Tobias Ellwood lost his brother in the Bali bombing, and he found, as many did, the idea of turning these instruments of murder into objects of art repugnant. He described the exhibition in Bournemouth as tasteless and insensitive. The Chapman brothers, who've previously been nominated for the Turner Prize, have form on this. They specialise in outrage and are shrewd operators when it comes to knowing how to provoke horror and a helpful headline. Their work, for instance, was removed by a gallery in Italy after a children's rights group complained that their use of graphically modified mannequins was tantamount to child pornography. Closer to home, an exhibition of their work in Lancashire inspired more indignation than admiration after they reimagined a crazy golf course to include one hole which featured a model of Hitler saluting a winning putt. And in Russia, their depiction of the crucifixion with the form of Jesus replaced by Ronald McDonald prompted demonstrations by members of the Russian Orthodox Church. For the record, I think the Chapmans' work is meretricious, exploitative and grubby. I'm entitled to my view, and like it or not, they are entitled to put on shows like theirs, no matter how objectionable in a free society that is the deal. But I do hope they avoid any grand claims about being bravely transgressive. It's one thing to irritate a Conservative MP, even one whose brother was blown up by jihadists, another to offer an artistic exploration of what prompted someone to put on a suicide vest in the first place. Because although suicide bombers were first widely used by Tamils in their fight for independence in Sri Lanka, in recent years they've become associated with one particular ideological position. Why is it then, do you think, that the Chapman brothers seem to be limiting their artistic study of suicide vests? After all, as their past works have shown, they seem very happy ridiculing the follies of organised religion. Might it be that they've calculated that it's one thing to offend Christians and Jews, but wise not to antagonise anyone who might feel that suicide bombing actually isn't such a bad thing? Could it be that they are part of a cohort of artists and comedians who like to consider themselves as plucky convention defiers, slayers of sacred cows, but who actually draw the line at poking fun at Islamists? They know how that might end. Personally, I don't see why people have to go out of their way to mock religion. As a God-bothering Catholic, I don't like it, even as I can see lots of things that have been done in the name of my faith that are worthy of mockery. So I understand more than some, perhaps, why a fair few Muslims are sensitive to satire when it's aimed at their faith. But I would defend the right of other people, braver people than me, who don't feel that way. You might think that the Chapman brothers, with their Ronald McDonald Christ and Hitler crazy golf, would turn their twisted artistic thoughts to this. Instead, they depict suicide vests almost as inanimate objects, devoid of a body, yes, but also missing a guiding mind or theology. As I say, I don't blame them for this, just so long as they don't pass themselves off as heroic paragons of free expression. The gallery in Bournemouth defended the suicide vest. By the way, a statement read, "Obviously, we think it's really sad that he lost his brother," that's Tobias Ellwood, "and terrorism is wrong and terrible, but artists will make work about the world around them, and it's important that they do." Which is true, of course. Art that reflects life is important, although, sadly, it's not a global right. I say this because, as they were getting ready to dismantle the Chapman suicide vest exhibition in Bournemouth, the Taliban were murdering young people at a party in Afghanistan. What heinous crime against piety had they committed? What act of free expression cost them their lives? They were playing music at a wedding. That's the Brazier angle. Joining me to ponder on this, Fraser Myers from Spiked. Fraser, welcome to you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
There is a line to be drawn for people sometimes who struggle with that line, which is that in a free society we must tolerate things which we personally find intolerable.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you've given the example of the Taliban. We can see where things go if we don't allow free expression. And you could even say the Taliban agree with free speech for anyone that agrees with their values. Stalin is for free speech for people who agree with Stalin. So if free speech is to have any meaning, it has to include things that we find objectionable, offensive and shocking.
My contention goes a bit further than that, though. I'm making the point that actually sometimes it seems to me, maybe you agree, maybe you don't, I don't know, that in the world of art and comedy, the arts generally actually, that there are people who rejoice in just how transgressive they are and how much they break boundaries and all the rest of it. But actually, and I'm not picking on Islamists here particularly, it's just that this is an exhibition about suicide vests by artists who have shown a signal ability in the past to ridicule and hold up for ridicule Christianity and to some degree even Judaism, but won't do it, it seems, for Islamism.
I think the progressive arts establishment is slightly stuck in the past, and they think of themselves as fighting against this, conservative, traditional behemoth that actually really doesn't exist. So while I think it was really important, in decades past, that people challenged the grip of, religious elites on society, that isn't the case now. And now we have a new taboo, as you say, against ridiculing Islam and Islamism. And there is something of a progressive taboo in that. It's not just conservative Islamist fundamentalists who bristle at the mockery of Islam. It's also progressives who see it as racist. There is also an element, perhaps, of genuine fear. We have seen,
I think there's a big part.
A big part of it. The Charlie Hebdo example being the most pertinent, but also people like the Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh. There can be a genuine consequence to mocking Islam, mocking the Prophet.
Fraser, we get all that, don't we? We get all that. And I come back to my point that, so if you are presenting yourselves, and actually, to be fair to the Chapman brothers, I haven't seen a statement from them saying, look at how brave we are, but we know there are others who position themselves in that, aren't we brave, aren't we transgressive, breaking these boundaries. If they just admit to it, just saying, look, we're not tackling this one because actually we know how it might end.
Well, I think it is the great unspoken. And we saw recently, if you think of the horrific murder of David Amos, you think about how, no one was really able to articulate that Islamism was the problem. I think, quickly talking about social media anonymity, anything to avoid discussing Islamism, that's a problem for our political class, it's a problem for our artistic establishment, so I'm not surprised at all that it hasn't come up in this case.
Got another couple of stories for you tonight to reflect on. One is this one. Britain's Equalities Minister has put the cat among the pigeons with a less than complimentary appreciation of Black History Month. This is Kemi Badenoch, who told Trevor Phillips on Sky News that it was in danger, Black History Month, not Sky News, of effectively becoming Racism History Month. It was, she added, an American import, which was being used by some people to advance a, as she put it, contrived agenda. Fraser, this is strong stuff from somebody who was building a reputation as somebody who will say seemingly quite unsayable things about things that some people will say no aren't actually American imports, are quite organically created here.
Yeah, I think there is a kind of organic Black History Month, but I think there are some criticisms that she's made that are fair. And I think a lot of the time when we talk about race in this country, we seem to directly import American ideas when they make no sense in this context. If you think about a word like BIPOC, which is now becoming popular, that means, black, indigenous people of colour. Now, that makes no sense in a British context where indigenous people are white. Whereas it does make sense in America, and these things are just kind of seamlessly imported. I would also say, perhaps this is maybe to defend the British Black History Month or the need for it, is that I think that a lot of younger people don't actually know anything about Black British history. I expect they know a lot more about...
A lot of young people don't know a lot about white British history.
That's true as well, but I suspect that more people, a lot of people probably only heard about the Windrush arrival after the Windrush scandal. I suspect a lot more people know about, Martin Luther King and the American Civil Rights Movement than they know about our own struggles.
But more people know about Martin Luther King than know about Martin Luther.
That's also true, who he was named after. And so, no, that's not to let Black History Month off the hook, of course. I think one of her really good points was that it is in danger of becoming Racism History Month. And you see that there has become a certain way that we have to talk about race now. So, and you see that through Black History Month, that it's all about a discussion of systemic racism, structural racism, critical race theory, which is a very different way of viewing race than we would have viewed it in the past. Essentially overturning the idea that we should all be treated equally and saying that we should be treated unequally according to our various alleged disadvantages.
Turning the words of Martin Luther very much on their head.
Absolutely.
In the process. One more, just got time for this. Here's a question. Should the police get involved if Halloween decorations grow too gory? Is there such a thing as too gory? Can they, in fact, cause offence? These are questions prompted by a macabre display in the front garden of a home in Leicestershire. The homeowners are Rob and Joe Flower. They regularly deck out their home in displays for Christmas, but also for Halloween. This year, the police got in touch with them with a request to, quote, tone things down following a complaint. The Flowers insist their decorations are popular with neighbours and allow them to raise money for a cancer charity. I think it was a severed head, not literally,
yes,
that seemed to cause the offence. I've noticed a drift towards greater goriness for Halloween.
Yeah, certainly, but I think people understand that the context is Halloween. People like
another one of those American imports.
Another one of those American imports, yeah. And you know, I think even the children like to be scared on Halloween. And it's interesting. I think what it says is that the police are increasingly getting involved in policing public life, policing, you know, essentially trying to stop people from being offended, getting more in these kind of little neighbourly disputes that have nothing really to do with their job in tackling crime. They visited the house at least twice, from my understanding, once when they weren't in and once when the man was there and told him to tone it down. I mean, this is not a good use of police time, really. And off the back of one anonymous complaint, it seems. It only takes one person to be offended for the police to spring into action. Would they be there as quickly if you got burgled? I'm not so sure.
And without the police, without the state getting involved, what is the corrective mechanism? I get back in the day when we lived in less atomised times and communities were stronger and people knew their neighbours. And it seems quite a neighbourly area that we're talking about here. It just sort of organically, people worked out what was right, what was wrong.
Yeah.
But we've moved away from that.
Well, why can't we talk to our neighbours? And unless we talk to our neighbours, unless we have get that conversation going, then nothing's going to change. You know, you should be able to say how you feel to your neighbour without breathing down, you know, barking at them or something.
Yeah.
If you ask nicely.
There you go, Fraser. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You did come in. After the break, step forward Camilla and Princess Beatrice as the Queen recuperates. Some royal watchers say it's time for a changing of the guard when it comes to public duties.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Well, lockdown saw a sharp increase in the number of so-called honour crimes committed in England. Data released by 28 police forces showed that offences like rape, death, threats and assault carried out in some communities rose from 884 in 2016 to 1,599 last year. It's not clear how much of the increase is down to more accurate reporting it could be, although some victims groups stress whatever the number is, it's likely to be a substantial underestimation of the number of crimes that are actually being carried out. Let's turn to Imran Kodabokas, who's with the family law company, which represents families who find themselves, sad to say, in such straitened cases and circumstances. Imran, thanks ever so much for joining us this evening. You always wonder when a freedom of information request is needed to extract data like this. Why do we not know more about it? Is it because it's just not a priority for police forces, society at large? What's going on?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, Mr. Brazier. The first is that it only became mandatory in around 2019 to be recorded by the Home Office. So automatically we're at a backhander with trying to assess the accuracy of the data we receive. The second reason is that it is a hidden crime. Many families don't want to speak out about it because they feel shame, they feel the fear of persecution. So the numbers we get are never going to be truly reflective of what's really happening on the ground.
What was happening without lockdown? How much do you think did lockdown exacerbate what was currently happening?
Well, from my perspective, one of the things we've noticed is that we rely on outside agencies to perhaps pick up on things that are perhaps not right in the home, and that can be usually with the children, for example, teachers, social workers, family practitioners. And during lockdown, without that kind of outside agency involvement, things weren't being detected as much. If data, as the data says, families, people who are suffering from honour-based violence are fearful of actually speaking out, then if there aren't those people who they can perhaps reach out to, or aren't those people who can detect those kind of problems, then that's going to mean people aren't going to have that kind of ability to pick up and give those people support they need.
Do you think the police have the resources and the will to look deeply into this?
I think there's two issues there. First of all, it's well publicised that many police forces will say they are understaffed. I think that's perhaps been exacerbated by the pandemic. The real issue is probably the training that the police don't have. Some forces haven't even released their data. For example, Greater Manchester Police haven't released their data. So we don't know what's happening.
To be clear, Imran, as you know, they're saying that's because of a new IT system and a reporting system. That there's nothing nefarious about it, so they say.
So they say. But the issue still remains that there is not enough training on the ground for police officers. And if police officers don't recognise some of the, let's say, the telltale signs of honour-based violence, and how are they going to go and help people and give them the support they need?
People listening to that and thinking, oh, is this a case of cultural sensitivities again around race and religion, or is it just a lack of curiosity on the part of the police?
I think it's probably the latter. I think it's probably a case of cultural insensitivity, that the police haven't got those tools in their locker to be able to assess whether people are being coerced to not speak out, whether people are being controlled to act in a certain way, whether children are perhaps picking up on the ways they treat others. The police don't have, perhaps in my opinion, the perhaps skills to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, can we drill down a little bit into the detail of this? I mean, I know some people feel it's odious to draw comparisons between different parts of the country or different communities. But is this a particular problem within, say, the Pakistani community, the Bangladeshi community? Where or is it, give us a sense of background on this.
Well, the data we've received doesn't actually tell us the origins of the people who have been committing honour-based violence. And I think it's probably wrong to label it specific to potentially a particular group, because that actually defeats the purpose. That is actually a prevalent theme across many different cultures. And actually the issue is really to try and understand that as an issue rather than perhaps attribute it to a particular group.
OK. Well, it's a story we'll come back to, I'm sure, in the future, but we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. It is almost a fortnight since the Queen cancelled a trip to Northern Ireland, and she's now being urged to rest until the middle of this month as she recovers from an undisclosed ailment. And there are calls today for the palace to make sure that there are enough senior royals available to make sure that Her Majesty's constitutional responsibilities are not neglected. The existing convention is that if the sovereign were to be incapacitated, her official duties, things like signing official papers, attending the Privy Council, the meetings thereof, can be carried out by her Councillors of State. Prince Philip was one of those councillors, but with his death and the departure from frontline royal life of Prince Andrew and Prince Harry, there appears to be a shortage of senior royals able to fulfil some official engagements on behalf of the Crown. It's led to speculation in the papers of a bigger role for some royal women, particularly Camilla, but also Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, the Princess Royal, and Princess Beatrice. Joining me now is the royal writer, Rafe Hedel-Mancu. Rafe, thanks so much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Councillors of State, old role, important role, something we can live without?
Very obscure title. Most people will never have heard of it, but actually very important. In the early part of the 20th century, Councillors of State, who, as you said, do act on behalf of the sovereign to do things like grant royal assent if the Queen is abroad, for example, or having a baby. Our Queen's been in remarkably good health medically, so we've been fortunate not to have any real issues apart from things like births and so forth. But in the old days, even the Archbishop of Canterbury could be brought in to act and fulfil royal duties. The Lord Chief Justice. It was a very ad hoc thing that was being done. So the Queen's father set down the rules in 1937 in the Regency Act, which covers what would happen if there was a permanent incapacity or if the monarch was a junior, was a child, a minor.
Yeah, this all with the sort of Prince Regent. I'm showing my lack of historical...
George III, yes. So you did have temporary acts then, but nothing really comprehensive. And the creation of Councillors of State happened at this time, and it was stated that the spouse of the sovereign and then the next 4 people in the line of succession who were adults over 21. So there we get Charles, William, Harry and Andrew. But of course, as you said, 3 of those people are now no longer available for the position for one reason or another. Now, I see no reason why this can't be changed. In 1953, the Queen Mother was allowed to continue to be a Councillor of State, even though her husband was no longer the king. And there's no reason at all I could see to not have someone such as Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, who will automatically become a Councillor of State once her husband becomes king. But also people like, I would say, the Princess Royal would make absolute common sense, somebody who's very used to this sort of a role and has all of the necessary gravitas that you would expect for this.
And has an appetite for hard work as well, doesn't she? We know that to be true. I mean, I'm in danger of conflating 2 things here. There seems this very strict role for Councillors of State, things like sitting in for the Crown at the Privy Council, and what appears to be, and you know far more about this than the vast majority of us, a dearth of people willing to do the donkey work of royal family life, the cutting of the ribbon, the planting of the trees, the opening of the new school. That's slightly different, exactly. But the same problem too.
Anybody can open the fates in the schools. You don't have to be a Councillor of State to do that. But yes, but this issue highlights the broader problem that we're having now is with the disappearance of Harry and Meghan, there is a dearth of royals on the ground, and the policy of the Prince of Wales had been to streamline the monarchy. So there was a deliberate moving away from the Yorks, from Beatrice and Eugenie. At the time, it wasn't, because everybody thought the Fab Four would be a new golden age, with Meghan becoming a Heineken princess, able to reach the parts that other princesses couldn't reach. Now, unfortunately, she's not Heineken, she's more Marmite than Heineken.
Well, the Heineken went flat.
The Heineken went flat. And so there is this problem now of not enough people around. And it's going to have to be a big decision in Clarence House and Buckingham Palace. Do we actually go again to a wider royal family and then get the criticism about everyone being on the ex-civil list and all of the costs involved with that?
There's a generational dynamic to this as well, isn't there? I mean, you know, some of the older royals, members, extended royal family, Duke of Gloucester, etc., of a certain, very hard-working, done sterling work over the years, but getting on a bit. But will people look at someone like Princess Beatrice and think, oh, there's somebody we can relate to? I mean, I get it with someone like Sophie, Countess of Wessex, who actually is comes across as a really good egg. People warm to her. Ditto Camilla, obviously. But there are limits, aren't there?
I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I would be very surprised if Beatrice or Eugenie did become Councillors of State, whereas I wouldn't be surprised if the Earl of Wessex, both Prince Edward, and Sophie did both become. And this is a 20-year problem, because everyone's now has to wait for the children of Prince William to become of age and fulfil the roles that we were hoping would be filled right now. And it's going to be a problem lasting because, of course, obviously, the Prince of Wales is not young either. He'll be a nonagerian in not too long at a time. And so the ageing of the monarchy is going to be another great issue. Now, all the other monarchies of Europe have set abdications of around 75. And when you even have the Pope, Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict abdicating, there may come a time in 40 years, definitely not our Queen, her being Queen is a covenant with the people, definitely won't be Prince Charles, but who knows if William at the age of 75 might think we need to actually get the nation around a new young monarch.
I'm out of time, but since you mentioned Prince Charles and we saw him and the words that he delivered, quite portentous words, in a word, does he go too far, does he stray too far into politics still, or can he get away with it while he's still Prince of Wales?
He has promised that he will not become an activist monarch when he accedes to the throne, so we shall have to hold him to his word.
Rafe, it's so nice when people take me at my word and just keep it short, but thanks very much indeed, Rafe. Thanks a lot. Well, we told you a while ago about the fact that the clock is ticking when it comes to the Anglo-French dispute over fish. 11 p.m. UK time, that seems to be the deadline that the French have set for the UK to decide what we are going to do in terms of giving more permits for French vessels to fish in British waters, specifically, ostensibly, around Jersey, Channel Islands. Let's get an update from our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, hi to you. Where does this end, do you think? And is the clock really ticking?
Well, the clock certainly was ticking towards midnight, Paris time, 11 p.m. here in the UK, with a view to what happens next. But we have been getting indications now and some comments made by the French President Emmanuel Macron at the COP26 on the sidelines of the COP26 summit, that he has agreed, it seems, to push that deadline back a little to further talks with the UK government. They have been, we're told, officials in negotiations throughout today. Emmanuel Macron seems hopeful that there could be some kind of movement from his UK counterparts. Whether that is true or not, I don't know. But he is indicating that we'll wait and see tomorrow what comes out of these talks, which have been ongoing as well in Brussels with the EU and officials from the UK and France looking at a way forward. This all hinges, of course, on these fishing licenses and effectively the French government saying that not enough fishing licenses have been handed out to the French. What the British say, in line with the government in Jersey, which has been dealing with a similar issue, is that unless the French boats can confirm that they have and provide proof that they have fished in these UK waters at some point over the past 3 years, then they will not be granted licenses. And there's about 70 odd of these vessels, French vessels, that so far have been denied a license. There's some 55 in Jersey who are being denied licenses. They're being told, though, if you come up with the proof, either through satellite navigation equipment, through your own boat logs, that would be enough to confirm that you'd fished in these waters, your charts and the like. But so far, the British and the Jersey governments have said that they have not had that proof, and that's why they've not been able to grant these licenses. That's, of course, infuriated the French, but at the moment, perhaps a hopeful sign that for a while at least, maybe another day, we're not going to get, Colin, this showdown that we were expecting from midnight tonight, French time.
They've stopped the clock. Mark, thanks very much. Mark White there. Asked you earlier, we'll try and throw up the tweet to show you that it's still possible. Oh, no, you can't vote anymore. You've run out of time. But the question was, does it matter if an elderly American president is filmed falling asleep at COP26? Nearly more than 7,500 of you have voted, and some of your thoughts, were less than charitable. Although, to be fair, I reckon most people would fall asleep listening to that nonsense, says Marina. Just to show he doesn't care, says David. Frederick says the simple answer to that question is, would it be OK for me to fall asleep at my work? You're all very harsh, aren't you? Mark Dolan is next. Stand by.
Hi there.
It's been another blustery day across the UK, but overall the wind does ease somewhat over the next 24 hours. Clear spells for many, but further showers in places, especially during Tuesday. Low pressure is moving away. That's brought a strong wind during recent days and some fairly heavy rainfall. But as that pushes away, the isobars open up, particularly across southern parts of the UK, with the winds easing here and clear spells expected. Northern and western parts of the country see further